My name is Dara Okonkwo, and I am 27 years old. At 24, I applied for a student loan deferment to go back to school and discovered I had $290,000 in debt. Not deferred student loans, not a mortgage. I had never signed a lease in my own name, never opened a credit card, never borrowed a dollar from any institution in my life. But someone had. For 8 years, someone had been opening accounts, filing loan applications, and running a catering business, all under my name and my social security number. When I called my uncle to ask why, he said I was being dramatic, that it was all family, that it would all be sorted out. Family handles things, he said, like $290,000 was an administrative error, a rounding problem, a misunderstanding between reasonable people. But here's what my uncle did not know about me. I'm a forensic accountant. I trace money for a living. And the money hiding in their accounts took me 16 months and one federal investigation to fully unravel. Welcome. This is where real stories get told without performance, without rage, with only the documents and the truth. Drop a comment wherever you are in the world. Subscribe if you are new here. I read every one. Let me take you back to where this started. I grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina. Not the wealthy part, not the struggling part. The in-between part where the houses have good bones and leaky roofs and the parents work hard enough to stay in place without moving forward. My mother, Adeyes, came from Nigeria in 1991 on a student visa and stayed the way people stay when the country they left no longer has the shape they remember. She became a licensed practical nurse. She worked nights for 22 years so she could be home when I came back from school. My father, Joseph, worked for the city water department, maintenance division, the kind of job that holds a city together while everyone ignores it. They were not wealthy people. They were precise people. Bills paid on the first, receipts kept in a folder, envelopes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. I had one uncle, my father's older brother, Dara Okonkwo. He had come to the United States 2 years after my father, settled in Charlotte, started a catering and event business that served the Nigerian community up and down the I-85 corridor, church events, naming ceremonies, weddings, community gatherings. Uncle Ray was what people in our community called a connector, a man who knew everyone, a man who moved through rooms with the authority of someone who has been trusted so many times that trust itself has become his most reliable asset. He called my father every Sunday. He came for Christmas. He hugged me at every graduation and called me his daughter because I was the only niece and he had no children of his own. I loved him. I believed in him the way you believe in a person who has never given you a reason not to. My parents believed in education the way some families believe in property. You invest in it and it compounds. I was good at numbers from the time I understood what numbers were. I won the regional math Olympiad in 8th grade. I graduated third in my high school class. I got into the University of North Carolina on a partial academic scholarship and paid the rest through a combination of federal loans, work study in the financial aid office, and a weekend job at a tax preparation chain that I started at 19 and which taught me more about money and how ordinary people mismanage it than any classroom ever did. I graduated with a degree in accounting at 22 and passed my CPA exam on the first attempt 6 months later. I got a job at a regional forensic accounting firm in Raleigh that audited financial records for insurance claims and fraud investigations. I was good at it immediately. My supervisor, a woman named Kathleen Sears, who had 30 years in the field and the particular precision of a person who has spent decades proving things that seemed unprovable, said I had an instinct for finding the inconsistency in the middle of clean data, the one number in the column that did not fit. I made $52,000 my first year. I was living in a furnished room I rented from a retired teacher in Raleigh because I had not yet had enough clear months to save first and last and deposit for my own place. I sent $300 home every month. My mother always told me not to. I always did anyway. My Uncle Ray called the month after I passed my CPA exam. He was proud, he said, effusive and warm in the way he always was. A forensic accountant in the family, he said. He laughed. That is something. Tell me what you were working on. I told him. Insurance fraud, mostly. We traced the money backward from the claim. He asked good questions. At the end of the call, he said, I have a business proposal for you. When you are settled, I want to talk to you about the catering operation. We need someone who understands the books. I said I would love that. I meant it. I was proud to be useful to him. I put it out of my mind. I was building my life one paycheck at a time, one cleared bill at a time. That is the pace of a 22-year-old on a first professional salary, and I did not resent it. I was good at the slow work. I had grown up watching my parents do the slow work, and I had understood early that the slow work was the only kind that lasted. 24 months after starting my job, I was ready to move into my own apartment. Not a room, my own lease, my own kitchen, my own door with my name on the buzzer. I found a one-bedroom in a building near downtown Raleigh, $1,050 a month, second floor, hardwood floors, a window above the kitchen sink that caught the morning light. I filled out the application on a Thursday evening, paid the $40 fee, submitted my pay stubs, my bank statement, a letter from my employer. Then I went to my desk and started reading for the weekend. I was studying for a continuing education credit in financial forensics. I had the material spread across my kitchen table and a cup of tea going cold, and everything was ordinary. 4 days later, the property management company called. My application had been declined. Significant credit issues. I had never opened a credit account. I had student loans from UNC, all federal, all in good standing, all deferred under my current income. No credit cards, no car loans. I had driven my parents' old Honda for 2 years and paid the insurance monthly in cash because that was how my mother had always done things. Cash only. Receipts in a folder. Labels in careful handwriting. I went to annualcreditreport.com that same evening and pulled all 3 bureaus. The report that loaded was not mine. It had my name. It had my social security number. It had my date of birth. But the address on the majority of accounts was 4417 Canfield Road, Charlotte, North Carolina. Uncle Ray's business address. I sat at my kitchen table and I read from the beginning. A business credit card opened 8 years earlier when I was 16. A second business credit card, 2 years later. A commercial vehicle loan, $34,000. A cargo van financed in my name. A small business loan, $85,000 through a regional bank in Charlotte listed under a business called Okonkwo Premier Catering LLC with me as the registered agent and sole proprietor. A second business loan, $45,000, 2 years after the first. Lines of credit, equipment financing. A personal credit card opened in the name of Dara Okonkwo at the Canfield Road address with a credit limit of $15,000, maxed and unpaid. Multiple collection items. 2 civil judgments from vendors who had not been paid. Total outstanding debt, $287,440. I read every page. I took notes in a legal pad in the shorthand I used at work, the same system Kathleen had taught me for evidence organization. Column A, account type. Column B, institution. Column C, opening date. Column D, amount. Column E, current status. The oldest account had been opened 1 month after my 16th birthday. The LLC had been registered the same month in the state of North Carolina with my full legal name, my social security number, and a signature that was not mine. I closed the laptop. I sat at my table with my notes in front of me and looked out the window at the Raleigh night, the street lights and the rain, and I thought about my uncle's voice on the phone 2 years before. A forensic accountant in the family. He laughed. That is something. He had already been doing this for 6 years when he said that. Before I tell you what I did, let me tell you what I did not do. I did not call my uncle that night. I did not call my parents. I did not send an email. I did not post anything. I did not act before I had the full picture, because acting before the full picture is how you warn people, and I had not spent 2 years training to find financial fraud in order to warn the person committing it. I was a forensic accountant. I sat with the data. I let the data build. If this is landing somewhere in you, take a breath, hit subscribe, and stay with me, because this next part is the part that changed everything. I spent the following weekend the way I spent every working weekend, methodically with documentation. I pulled the North Carolina Secretary of State Business Database and searched Okonkwo Premier Catering LLC. Registered agent, Dara Okonkwo. Filing date, 3 weeks after my 16th birthday. Filed during the month of June. I had spent June of my 16th year studying for final exams and working a summer shift at the public pool as a lifeguard for $8.25 an hour. I was not in Charlotte. I had not been near Charlotte that summer because my mother had taken me on a train trip to see my aunt in Baltimore, and we had been gone the entire last 2 weeks of June. I pulled my mother's old calendar from my phone. She had been digitizing her paper planners the year before and had photographed every page. I had helped her do it on a Sunday afternoon. The June calendar showed 2 weeks in Baltimore starting June 15th. The LLC was filed June 19th. I photographed the calendar screenshot. I labeled it. I added it to my evidence folder. I called the North Carolina Secretary of State's office on Monday morning from my car before walking into work. I explained that I believed a business had been registered using my information without my consent. The woman on the line told me I needed to submit a written complaint with supporting identification. I did it that afternoon from my desk during lunch. Then I called my student loan servicer and confirmed that my federal loans were the only educational debt attached to my Social Security number. They were. I called the Social Security Administration and requested a full earnings record. It arrived in my email 3 days later. For the tax year I was 17, my Social Security number had reported self-employment income of $47,000. For the year I was 18, $62,000. For the year I was 19, while I was a sophomore at UNC eating instant noodles and working 20 hours a week in the financial aid office, my Social Security number reported $89,000 in business income from Okonkwo Premier Catering LLC. The taxes on that reported income had been filed. The refunds I would find later had been deposited to a checking account at a Charlotte credit union. The account holder was Okonkwo Premier Catering LLC. The authorized signatory was Raymond Okonkwo, my uncle, not my parents, my uncle. I want to be precise here about what I felt when that information assembled itself in front of me, because what I felt was not what you might expect from a story like this. I did not feel rage. I felt the particular cold clarity that comes when a hypothesis that has been building quietly in the back of your mind for 3 days is suddenly confirmed by evidence. I felt the same thing I felt when I found the discrepant wire transfer in my first major fraud case at work. The case that Kathleen had praised, the moment where the numbers stop lying and start telling you exactly what happened. I felt accurate, which is to say, I felt like myself. I asked Kathleen to have coffee with me that Friday, not at the office, at a place 2 blocks away. She brought her reading glasses and a notebook. I brought my evidence folder. I told her the situation in the terms I would have used at work if it had been a client case. She read the documentation I had assembled in 5 minutes. She removed her glasses. She said, "Dara, this is not a civil matter. This is federal." "I know. What do you want to do?" "I want to do it correctly," she said. "Then you need an attorney first. Then the FTC. Then the IRS. Then you talk to the FBI." She paused. She looked at the folder. "There's something else here. The tax returns filed under your SSN. If the business claimed deductions for equipment, staff, materials, those are fraudulent returns that generated fraudulent refunds deposited to accounts controlled by your uncle. That is tax fraud, mail fraud if refund checks were mailed, and wire fraud if anything was direct deposited." She looked at me. "The charges stack quickly in these cases. I know. I have read the statutes before." She nodded. She closed the folder. She handed it back across the table. "Do you have family in the picture?" "My uncle runs the business." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the voice she used when she was about to say something that was also advice but was not going to be presented as advice, "I once worked a case where the subject was the victim's mother. Took us 18 months. The mother never understood what she had done. When she was sentenced, she told the courtroom she had done it because she loved her daughter." I looked at Kathleen. "What did you do with that?" She said, "My job. That is what I do every time. I do my job. I finished my coffee. I did mine." The attorney I found was named Priya Mehta, a consumer rights and identity theft specialist who worked out of Raleigh with a caseload that was almost entirely financial fraud. She was 38, direct, and had the rare quality of being able to explain complicated legal concepts in plain sentences without making you feel like you were being condescended to. She reviewed my documentation in one meeting. She said, "This is one of the cleaner cases I have seen in terms of the paper trail. Your uncle was not careful about separating your identity from his business records. The loan applications still have the application dates, and you have the calendar evidence placing you out of state when the LLC was filed. She leaned back. Before we do anything, I need to know. Have you spoken to your parents? No, not yet. She nodded. That matters. If your parents had any knowledge of this, the picture changes. I need you to have that conversation before we file anything. Not because it changes whether we file, but because you deserve to know what you are walking into. I drove to Greensboro that weekend. I did not tell them why I was coming. I said I needed to see them, which was always true. My mother made jollof rice, and my father made the mild pepper soup I had loved since I was small, and we sat at the table the way we always sat. The three of us, the shape of the family I had come from, the specific warmth of people who have lived honestly together for a long time. After dinner, after my father fell asleep in his chair with the television on, I sat at the kitchen table with my mother, and I opened my laptop and I showed her the credit reports. I watched her face. My mother is a nurse. She has trained her face to absorb difficult information without broadcasting what she is feeling, because when you are a nurse, patients read your face, and your face tells them things that the words are still deciding. But she was not in a hospital room. She was in her kitchen, and something cracked. Not all at once. In slow stages, the way a windshield cracks when the temperature changes and the fracture spreads from one point outward, she said. How long? I said. The first account opened 8 years ago. She pressed both palms flat on the table. She was very still. She said, in the voice she used when she was containing something large. I knew about the business. I knew Ray used your name on the registration. He told me it was for liability reasons, that as a minor your name would create a different legal structure. I did not ask more questions. I should have asked more questions. I looked at my mother. She was 61 years old. She had worked nights for 22 years. She had labeled every bill in a folder. She had come to this country alone at 19, with a student visa and a letter of admission to a nursing program, and she had built a life from careful, honest work, and she had trusted her husband's brother because he was family, and because he had never given her a reason not to. I said, Mom, do you know about the loans? The $85,000 business loan, the $45,000. The vehicle, she said. No. I stared at her. She stared at the laptop screen. Then she said, very quietly, he told us you had co-signed for equipment financing, that you had done it as a favor for the business, that you knew. I said, I was 16. She closed her eyes. The fracture in her face completed itself. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I believe you, she said. You do not need to tell me twice. I know my daughter. I reached across the table and took her hand. She held mine with both of hers. My father was a different conversation. He woke at 10, found us still at the table, read the situation in my mother's face before I said a word. He sat down. He listened. He did not try to explain it or contextualize it. He asked one question when I finished. What do you need from us? I need a written statement from both of you about what Ray told you and when. My attorney needs to know what you knew and what you were told. He nodded. He looked at his hands on the table. His hands, which had maintained city water pipes for 30 years, he said, I will write whatever you need. Then he said, Dara, I am sorry we did not see it sooner. I said, I know, Dad. It was designed not to be seen. He went quiet in the way he went quiet when something required him to sit with it, rather than process it immediately. My father had always been a man who needed a night to turn something large into something manageable. That as a minor, your name would create a different legal structure. I did not ask more questions. I should have asked more questions. I looked at my mother. She was 61 years old. She had worked nights for 22 years. She had labeled every bill in a folder. She had come to this country alone at 19 with a student visa and a letter of admission to a nursing program, and she had built a life from careful, honest work, and she had trusted her husband's brother because he was family and because he had never given her a reason not to. I said, Mom, do you know about the loans? The $85,000 business loan, the $45,000. The vehicle, she said. No. I stared at her. She stared at the laptop screen. Then she said, very quietly, "He told us you had co-signed for equipment financing, that you had done it as a favor for the business, that you knew." I said, "I was 16. She closed her eyes. The fracture in her face completed itself. She opened her eyes and looked at me. "I believe you," she said. "You do not need to tell me twice. I know my daughter." I reached across the table and took her hand. She held mine with both of hers. My father was a different conversation. He woke at 10, found us still at the table, read the situation in my mother's face before I said a word. He sat down. He listened. He did not try to explain it or contextualize it. He asked one question when I finished. "What do you need from us?" "I need a written statement from both of you about what Ray told you and when. My attorney needs to know what you knew and what you were told." He nodded. He looked at his hands on the table. His hands, which had maintained city water pipes for 30 years, he said, "I will write whatever you need." Then he said, "Dara, I am sorry we did not see it sooner." I said, "I know, Dad. It was designed not to be seen." He went quiet, and the way he went quiet when something required him to sit with it rather than process it immediately. My father had always been a man who needed a night to turn something large into something manageable. I drove back to Raleigh the next morning. He had left a handwritten statement on the kitchen table, 2 pages in his careful block letters. He had not slept. I want to pause here for a moment. If you are a parent listening to this, please look up from whatever you are doing right now and go check your child's credit report. If they are under 18, they should have no credit file at all. If they do, something is wrong. Go to annualcreditreport.com and look. It is free. It takes 10 minutes. My uncle counted on the fact that nobody was looking. He was right for 8 years. Please do not let him be right about your family. Back to Raleigh. That Monday, I called Uncle Ray. I had prepared for the call the way I prepared for client interviews at work. Calm, specific, factual. I asked if he had time to talk. He said, "Of course, Dara." "Always." I said, "I pulled my credit report. There are accounts under my name that I did not open." I named the oldest one. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he laughed. The laugh that Kathleen later said was textbook minimization. The casual laugh of a person who has been found but is trying to perform that the finding is not serious. "Dara, that is just the business structure. You know how these things work." I said, "I know exactly how these things work, Uncle Ray. That is my job." The laugh stopped. He said, "You are blowing this out of proportion. There is nothing there that will affect you." "I need you to close the accounts," I said. "I need the debt separated from my identity," he said. "This is not a conversation for the phone. Come to Charlotte and we can sit down." I said, "My attorney will be in contact this week." He hung up without responding. I called Priya Mehta before the hour was out. "I have had the conversation." He minimized and deflected. She said, "Expected. Let's file." The FTC identity theft affidavit took 3 hours to complete because I completed it entirely and with every supporting document attached. Priya reviewed it. I filed it. I filed disputes with all 3 credit bureaus, 21 separate disputes across Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Every account, every loan, the LLC registration, the equipment financing, the maxed personal card. I filed with the Raleigh Police Department. I filed with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Both reports named Raymond Okonkwo. Both included the LLC registration documents, the loan applications, the earnings records, the calendar evidence from my 16th birthday month, my parents' written statements. When I hit submit on the last bureau dispute at 9:43 on a Thursday night, I sat at my desk in my rented room and held very still for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen and made tea and drank it, and went to bed and slept better than I had in 2 weeks. My uncle called the following morning. Missed call, 7:22 a.m. Then a text. "We need to talk before this goes any further." I did not reply. I forwarded the text to Priya. Then I went to work and analyzed a medical billing fraud case for a hospital in Charlotte, which was the particular irony of that week that I had to carry professionally without letting it show. 2 weeks later, a knock came at my door on a Tuesday evening, not at my rented room, at my parents' house in Greensboro, where I was spending the weekend. My father answered. 2 men in business casual with federal credentials. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. They had reviewed the FTC filing and the police reports. The fraudulent tax returns filed under my Social Security number for 7 consecutive years, reporting business income I did not earn, and the refund deposits to accounts my uncle controlled had placed the case in federal jurisdiction. They wanted to speak to me and to my parents. They asked if we had an attorney. I said yes. I gave them Priya's card. They nodded. They said they would be in contact. My father closed the door. My mother was in the kitchen, her hands still. We sat in the living room, the 3 of us. My father put his arm around my mother. My mother looked at the wall, she said, very quietly. I should have asked more questions when he told me about the business structure. I said, you trusted him because he had never given you reason not to, she said. That is not an excuse. I said, no, but it is a reason. She looked at me. I said, the questions are mine to ask now. She nodded. She took my hand. Priya called the next morning with a detail that I had not found in my own research and that reframed the entire picture. I want to tell you this slowly because it matters. There was a second LLC, not Okonkwo Premier Catering, a different entity. RC Hospitality Supplies, LLC, registered in South Carolina 2 years after the first, also using my Social Security number. My name was not on this one, only my SSN, listed as an EIN application number for a sole proprietor. My uncle had used my Social Security number as the federal employer identification number for a second business I had never heard of. That business had its own bank accounts, its own credit lines, its own tax history. It had operated for 4 years and had collected $23,000 in additional IRS refunds deposited to accounts in my uncle's name. Priya said, the IRS criminal investigators have been tracking the RC Hospitality entity through a separate audit that predates your filing. Your complaint connected 2 investigations that were running in parallel without knowing they were the same subject. The federal agents who came to your parents' house on Tuesday are coordinating with a second team in Columbia, South Carolina. This is larger than your case, Dara. Your uncle has been using his family's identities as a financial infrastructure for at least a decade. Your parents are also showing some anomalous filings in their tax records from 9 years ago that the investigators want to discuss with them. I want you to prepare your parents. This is about to get harder before it gets resolved. I drove to Greensboro that Friday. I told my parents everything Priya had told me. My mother's jaw set in the way it set when she was holding something enormous with controlled force. My father was quiet for a long time. Then he said, he used us. Not just you, all of us. I said, yes. He looked at the wall. He said, then we cooperate fully, whatever they need, whatever tells the truth. My mother said the same thing, in fewer words. Yes, we cooperate. I called Priya that evening. My parents are fully cooperative, she said. Good. That distinction is going to matter in how this resolves for them. The next 14 months were the kind of months you live through 1 week at a time. I went to work. I analyzed fraud cases for clients I had never met. I came home to my rented room. The collection agency calls were happening on my parents' home line because the fraudulent accounts had used their address for some filings. My mother answered every call with the practiced composure of a woman who had delivered difficult diagnoses for 20 years. She documented every call in a notebook she kept by the phone, date, time, agency name, account referenced, exactly as I had told her to. When I visited on weekends, she handed me the notebook. It was always up to date. My mother learned documentation the same week I needed her to have it. I did not call Uncle Ray during those 14 months. He called me twice. The first time I let it go to voicemail, he said, I need you to understand the business was struggling. I needed liquidity. Your name was clean and mine was not, and I made a decision I should not have made. Call me back. I listened to the voicemail once. I sent it to Priya. She forwarded it to the federal investigators as a recorded partial admission. The second call came 2 months later. I answered. He said, Dara, my attorney says I should not be calling you, but you are my niece. I raised you like my own daughter. I said, you did not raise me. You borrowed my name. He was quiet. I said, how old were you when you first opened an account under my SSN? He said, Dara. I said, I was 16 years old. I was a lifeguard. I was studying for final exams. He said nothing. I said, I do not need you to understand what you did. The federal investigators understand it very clearly. I ended the call. My birthday that year fell on a Friday. I was turning 25. My colleague Tomas, who sat across from me and had been watching me manage the situation with the discretion of a person who understood professional distance and the appropriate use of it, brought a small cake to my desk at exactly 4 p.m. on that Friday. The office sang badly, the way small offices sing. Kathleen raised a coffee cup. I ate a piece of the cake. I thought about my 16th birthday and what had been filed in my name on that day, and I held the thought for exactly the length of time it took to finish the cake. Then I went back to work. I had a report due before the weekend. My Thanksgiving that year was at Cass's family home. I want to tell you about Tomas, my colleague, and his mother Rosario, because they were there and because what Rosario said to me is the thing I have returned to most often in the 2 years since. Rosario was 67, compact, with the particular energy of a woman who has survived things by deciding to be interested rather than afraid. She pulled me into the kitchen to help with dishes after dinner, and she asked me what was happening in my life in the way you ask someone when you already know something has been happening. I told her the outline. Not all of it. Enough. She dried a dish, she said. You know what I have learned about betrayal? The deepest kind is when someone borrows your trust and uses it to build something for themselves. Not your money, your trust. Because trust is the thing that lets them reach the money. I thought about my uncle calling my father every Sunday for 30 years. About the church events and the community gatherings and the name everyone said with respect in the Greensboro-Charlotte corridor. He had borrowed his brother's trust and used it to reach his brother's daughter's identity. Rosario put a dry dish in the cabinet. She looked at me. She said, You did not destroy a family. The fraud destroyed the family. You just turned the light on. I drove home from Thanksgiving and sat in my rented room and thought about what it meant to turn a light on. Month 14. Priya called on a Wednesday morning. I was at my desk reviewing a claims file. She said, The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of North Carolina and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of South Carolina have coordinated charges. Raymond Okonkwo is being indicted on 14 counts. She read them. Identity theft of a minor, 2 counts, for my SSN, and for a second minor whose identity he had also used, a young man in his extended community whom I had never met and who had discovered the problem through his own mortgage application 18 months before mine. Aggravated identity theft, tax fraud, 4 counts, mail fraud, 2 counts, wire fraud, 2 counts, bank fraud related to the loan applications, 3 counts. My parents were not charged. Their cooperation and the evidence that they had been deceived about the nature of the business structure supported a finding that they were not knowing participants. The attorney in Priya's network who had been working with them had handled it exactly right. I closed my office door and sat for a moment. 14 counts. A man who had called my father every Sunday for 30 years, who had hugged me at every graduation, who had said, 2 years ago, a forensic accountant in the family. That is something. He had already been using my name for 6 years when he said that. A letter arrived at my parents' house in Greensboro 6 weeks after the indictment, my uncle's handwriting on the envelope. My mother brought it to me the next weekend without opening it. She held it out in both hands the way you hold something that has weight you are not sure you should carry. I opened it at the kitchen table. It was 2 pages. He explained the business pressures, the competition from larger catering companies, the years when the events dried up and the fixed costs didn't. He said he had told himself it was temporary, that he would restore everything before it affected me, that by the time I needed credit, the debt would be resolved. The same story, I noticed, in its basic structure. The same architecture of justification that Priya had told me she saw in every case of family financial fraud. Temporary. Would have fixed it. Did not understand it would go this far. On the second page, near the end, he wrote, I watched you grow up and I was proud of you and I should have protected you instead of using you. I do not expect forgiveness. I am asking you to know that I understood what I did. I read that last sentence 4 times. Then I folded the letter along its original creases and put it in the drawer of my desk where I kept the evidence folder. The folder had grown to 43 pages. My father called me the night after I read the letter. He said, Did you get it? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "Whatever you decide about forgiveness is yours to decide. But I want you to know that your mother and I do not hold the same thing he did. We made a mistake in not asking more questions. We carry that." He paused. "But we did not know," I said. "I know, Dad," he said. "How are you?" I said, "I am good. I am actually very good." He said, "I know. I can hear it." I could hear him smiling on the phone, and I thought about how much it had cost him. A man who trusted his brother for 30 years to write 2 pages of honest block letters on a kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The plea negotiations moved through the winter. My uncle's attorney, a private defense lawyer from Charlotte with a strong regional reputation, managed the process with the precision you bring to a case where the evidence is clean and the best outcome is damage control. In February, Raymond Okonkwo pleaded guilty to identity theft of a minor, 2 counts of tax fraud, and 2 counts of bank fraud. 6 of the 14 counts were dismissed as part of the agreement. Sentencing: 26 months in a federal correctional facility, 3 years of supervised release. Restitution to me and to the second victim, the young man from his community, for the full fraudulent debt attached to our identities and the full amount of IRS refunds illegally collected. Total restitution order: $331,000 split between the two of us. The business was dissolved. The Charlotte catering operation that had served the Nigerian community up and down the I-85 corridor for 20 years, the tables and the tents and the warming equipment and the cargo van financed in my name, all of it dissolved in a single document filed with the North Carolina Secretary of State. I did not attend the sentencing. Priya offered to go. The second victim's attorney offered to coordinate a joint victim statement. I declined both. I had already said everything that needed to be said in 43 pages of documentation and a series of federal filings. I did not need to be in the room when the judge spoke. My mother called the evening of the sentencing. She had found out from the attorney who had been working with her and my father. She said, "Are you all right?" I said, "Yes," she said. "I have been thinking about something." She paused. "When I moved to this country, I brought almost nothing. But your grandfather gave me one piece of advice before I left," he said. "Adaisy, in a new country you will have nothing except your name and your record. Guard both like your life." She paused again. "I failed to guard yours," I said. "You did not know," she said. "I should have known." I said, "Mom." I held the phone. I said, "You taught me to label the envelopes. You taught me to keep the receipts. You taught me the only language that counts in that world, which is documentation. That is what I used. That is what got it done." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your grandfather would have liked that." I said, "I know. 16 months after I first pulled that credit report. 16 months of federal investigation, of evidence organization, of late nights and weekend drives to Greensboro and collection agency calls, and the specific loneliness of carrying something this large through an ordinary work week without being able to set it down. The credit bureau disputes were processed. One by one, across 3 agencies, the fraudulent accounts disappeared, the business credit cards removed, the vehicle loan for the cargo van removed, the $85,000 business loan removed, the $45,000 removed, the maxed personal card removed, the collection items removed, the civil judgments vacated. My credit file went from 43 pages of someone else's decisions to 4 pages of mine. My social security number, my date of birth, my real address in Raleigh. My student loans from UNC current and in good standing. Nothing else. Clean, mine. My credit score climbed the way scores climb when they are being built honestly. Slowly at first and then faster as the fraudulent weight lifted off. 401, 477, 541, 612, 668, 711. Not perfect, mine. 6 weeks after my credit was restored, I applied for the apartment on the 2nd floor in downtown Raleigh. The one with the hardwood floors and the window above the kitchen sink. The same apartment I had applied for 16 months earlier and been declined for, the application that had started everything, the $40 fee and the submitted pay stubs and the call that said significant issues. I submitted the same application, same building, same unit. The same property manager called back in 3 days. Ms. Okonkwo, you have been approved. I picked up the keys on a Thursday afternoon. 2 keys in a small paper envelope, one for the deadbolt, one for the mailbox. I held them in my palm in the lobby of the building and looked at them. 2 small pieces of metal that meant there was a door in the world with my name on the buzzer that I had put there myself, in my own handwriting, because I chose to. The first thing I moved in was the filing cabinet. Before the air mattress I had been sleeping on at the rented room. Before the desk. Before the lamp. The filing cabinet, a second-hand gray metal 2-drawer that I had found at an office liquidation sale, went into the bedroom closet. In the top drawer I put 4 items. My credit report, all 4 clean pages of it. The evidence folder, 43 pages. My parents' written statements, and the letter my uncle had sent from before his sentencing, the one that said I understood what I did. I did not know what to do with that letter for a long time. I still do not entirely. I do not believe that understanding what you did is the same as repairing what you did. But I believe that a person who sits down and writes those words is closer to the beginning of something real than a person who does not. What I do with that belief over the years that follow is something I will decide one conversation at a time. People ask me whether I regret filing, whether I regret naming my uncle in a federal complaint, whether I wish I had gone to him first, quietly, and given him the chance to fix it privately. I do not. Here is why. The debt would still exist. The fraudulent tax returns would still be out there with my Social Security number attached. The second victim, the young man from my uncle's community whose mortgage application had been declined 18 months before mine, would still not know why. The IRS investigation in South Carolina would still be running without connecting to what was happening in North Carolina. The infrastructure my uncle had built on borrowed identities would still be running. Quiet resolution does not dismantle an infrastructure. It just moves it slightly to one side. My name is Dara Okonkwo. I am 27 years old. I check my credit report every month. I log in. I read every entry. I verify every account. Not from fear. From the habit of someone who understands that a clean record is the most fundamental asset you own, and that it requires the same attention as any other asset. You do not put money in an account and never look at it again. You do not put your name on a world and stop paying attention. My grandfather told my mother, "In a new country you have nothing except your name and your record." He was talking about reputation, but he was also, without knowing the specific language for it, talking about credit, about the financial identity that a person builds through the documented record of what they do with what they are given. He gave my mother that advice so she could give it to me, and then someone borrowed it without asking. They almost got away with it. They were right for 8 years. They counted on the fact that nobody was looking. They counted on the fact that the only person whose name was on all those accounts would never understand what the accounts meant. They forgot that they had watched that person grow up, that they had called her the forensic accountant in the family with a laugh, that the laugh was the last thing they should have done. That is my story. 8 years of stolen identity, 16 months of documentation, 4 pages of clean credit and a mailbox key. If this story reminded you to check today. Your child's name, your own name, the filing that exists before you know it does. Drop a comment. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.